Stop drinking your coffee the same way. If you're over 60, plain coffee may be missing the one signal your arteries are begging for. It's not cholesterol, it's stiffness. In this video, I reveal the one powder that helps your blood vessels relax again. Most people believe arteries age the same way fruit spoils on a counter, slowly, visibly, and mostly because of time. That belief is comforting and wrong. In reality, arteries age more like machinery that's still running but no longer being maintained. From the outside, everything looks acceptable. Numbers may even fall within range. But inside the vessel wall, a different story is unfolding, one that doesn't announce itself until capacity is already lost. The modern focus on cholesterol and blood pressure has unintentionally narrowed the conversation. Those numbers matter, but they are not the driver. They are downstream reflections of something more fundamental. What actually ages arteries after 60 is a gradual breakdown in communication. The cells lining your blood vessels lose their ability to respond fluidly to demand. When muscles ask for more blood, the signal arrives late or distorted. When pressure needs to be absorbed, stiffness answers instead. This is not a plumbing problem, it's a signaling problem. At the center of this decline is nitric oxide, a molecule so small it's rarely discussed outside medical circles, yet so powerful it determines whether an artery behaves like living tissue or dead tubing. With age, nitric oxide production drops. At the same time, oxidative stress rises like microscopic rust spreading along the vessel wall. The endothelium becomes irritated, less responsive, and eventually resistant to its own instructions. Blood vessels stop opening when they should. Flow becomes inefficient. Pressure builds. The system compensates until it can't. Imagine a highway designed with adjustable lanes, widening during rush hour and narrowing when traffic thins. For decades, your arteries worked exactly like that. They expanded during exertion, adapted during stress, and relaxed during rest. Aging removes that adaptability. The lanes stop widening. Traffic backs up, not because the road is blocked, but because it has lost flexibility. That is what arterial aging looks like in the body. This is why so many older adults feel confused by their symptoms. I remember a man named Howard, 72 years old, whose test results repeatedly came back acceptable, cholesterol controlled, blood pressure reasonable. Yet every time he walked uphill, a tightness crept into his chest and legs. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger alarms, just enough to remind him something wasn't right. His issue wasn't blockage, it was rigidity. His vessels no longer responded quickly to increased demand, forcing his heart to work harder for the same outcome. What often goes unrecognized is that arteries respond not to single events, but to patterns. They listen to daily rhythms, how often blood flow increases, how frequently the endothelium is stimulated, how consistently the internal environment remains calm instead of inflamed. Short-term fluctuations matter far less than long-term direction. This is why some people deteriorate despite doing everything right, while others quietly maintain function well into their 70s and 80s. Arterial aging, then, is not a sudden failure. It is the cumulative result of neglected signaling. When movement becomes sporadic, meals lose structural balance, and stress remains unresolved, the endothelium adapts by becoming defensive. Stiffness is not a malfunction, it is a response. And once that response sets in, reversing it requires patience, repetition, and an understanding of what vessels actually need to hear. This is the foundation everything else rests on. Until arterial aging is understood as a biological conversation rather than a numerical score, most efforts will continue to miss the mark. The good news is that conversations can change, not overnight, but steadily and in ways the body still recognizes even after 60. For years, cocoa has lived in a strange place in nutrition, too indulgent to be taken seriously, too associated with sugar to be considered therapeutic. That misunderstanding has buried one of the more quietly interesting vascular tools available to aging bodies. Not chocolate bars, not flavored drink mixes. Pure, unsweetened cocoa powder, stripped of sweetness and processed additives, contains compounds that speak directly to the endothelium in a language it still understands. Inside cocoa are flavonols, a class of plant compounds that interact with blood vessels at the cellular level. Their influence is subtle but biologically meaningful. They support nitric oxide signaling, the same pathway that weakens with age, and help reduce the oxidative stress that interferes with endothelial responsiveness. This is not folklore or dietary mythology. Controlled clinical studies repeatedly show improved endothelial function and modest reductions in blood pressure when cocoa flavanols are consumed consistently. Not dramatic drops, not overnight changes, but a measurable shift toward flexibility. The mistake many people make is assuming all cocoa behaves the same way. Sweetened powders, instant mixes, and heavily processed chocolate products often contain little of what actually matters. Processing removes flavanols, while sugar adds metabolic noise that counteracts vascular benefit. What remains may taste familiar, but it no longer carries the same biological signal. The endothelium does not respond to flavor. It responds to chemistry. The effect of cocoa flavanols is best understood mechanically. Think of a stiff hinge on a door that still works but resists movement. Oil doesn't rebuild the door. It doesn't change its structure overnight. But applied regularly, it reduces friction. Movement becomes smoother. Stress on the frame decreases. Cocoa flavanols operate in a similar fashion inside blood vessels. They reduce resistance, improve responsiveness, and allow arteries to open when demand rises. The structure remains the same. The behavior improves. One woman I followed closely, Marilyn, 69, noticed changes that didn't announce themselves dramatically. Her hands felt warmer during walks. Her steps felt steadier. Hills required less mental preparation. Nothing miraculous, nothing immediate. Just a gradual return of ease she hadn't realized she'd lost. Her labs shifted modestly. Her experience shifted noticeably. That distinction matters, because vascular health is lived before it is measured. Coffee becomes a particularly effective carrier for this habit because it already fits into a morning rhythm. When unsweetened cocoa powder is stirred into coffee, the flavanols are delivered consistently, early in the day, when vascular responsiveness is naturally higher. The absence of sugar avoids insulin spikes that blunt nitric oxide activity. Taken regularly, the signal repeats, and repetition is how blood vessels relearn flexibility. It's important to understand what this powder is not. It is not a stimulant. It is not a vasodilator in the pharmaceutical sense. It does not override poor sleep, chronic stress, or inactivity. Its value lies in its quiet support of endothelial biology, reinforcing pathways that age has weakened but not erased. Used consistently, it contributes to an internal environment where arteries are less defensive and more cooperative. In isolation, this may sound underwhelming, and that's exactly the point. Biology rarely rewards single interventions. It responds to environments. Cocoa flavanols do their best work when they become part of a broader pattern, one that removes interference and amplifies signal. Without that context, even good inputs struggle to be heard. That realization leads directly to the deeper truth most people overlook. There is a particular frustration I've seen many times in older adults who are still paying attention, still trying, still hoping their bodies will respond. Something is added with care and consistency. Expectations are kept reasonable, and yet the result feels muted, not absent, just faint. That quiet disappointment doesn't come from doing the wrong thing. It comes from asking one small biological signal to compete against a much louder internal environment. Blood vessels are not passive plumbing. They are reactive tissue, constantly interpreting the conditions around them. Nitric oxide, the molecule cocoa flavanols help support, is especially sensitive to context. It is produced, preserved, and destroyed based on what else is happening in the body at the same time. High sodium intake stiffens vessel walls within hours. Long periods of sitting reduce shear stress, the very stimulus arteries rely on to stay flexible. Poor sleep elevates cortisol into the next day, narrowing vessels before the morning even begins. Under these conditions, helpful compounds don't stop working, they get drowned out. This is why isolated additions rarely deliver the relief people expect. The vascular system operates on cumulative math. Every day it tallies small insults and small supports. Inflammation does not spike once and disappear. It hums in the background. Stress hormones do not rise only during emergencies. They linger when recovery is incomplete. When these forces dominate, the endothelium adapts by becoming defensive. It constricts more readily. It dilates more slowly. It prioritizes survival over performance. Cocoa flavanols enter this system quietly. They encourage nitric oxide signaling and help reduce oxidative stress, but they do not override competing inputs. If blood sugar swings repeatedly through the day, nitric oxide is rapidly neutralized. If sleep is fragmented, endothelial repair processes that occur at night are truncated. If movement is inconsistent, vessels lose the mechanical stimulus that keeps them responsive. In that setting, expecting a noticeable shift from cocoa alone misunderstands how vascular biology works. What changes everything is when supportive signals begin to align. Movement increases blood flow, which creates gentle friction along vessel walls, reminding them how to relax. Balanced meals stabilize glucose, protecting nitric oxide from rapid degradation. Calmer evenings reduce sympathetic nervous system tone, allowing arteries to release tension instead of holding it overnight. Medications, when prescribed appropriately, lower baseline strain, so lifestyle signals are no longer fighting uphill. In that environment, cocoa flavanols don't have to shout. They can simply reinforce what the body is already trying to do. I've watched this shift occur in people who initially believed nothing was happening. Dennis, 76, was one of them. Early on, he noticed no clear changes and assumed the effect was theoretical at best. Weeks later, as his days became more predictable and his nights more restorative, something subtle changed. He recovered faster after walks. His breathing felt less labored on inclines. These were not dramatic milestones. They were functional improvements, the kind that restore confidence without drawing attention to themselves. The cocoa hadn't suddenly become more powerful. The biological noise had quieted. This is the essence of stacking, not accumulation for its own sake, but cooperation. Each supportive habit reduces interference for the others. The endothelium responds not to perfection, but to consistency. When it senses that blood flow is regularly stimulated, stress is periodically resolved, and nutrients arrive without metabolic chaos, it becomes less guarded. Arteries regain some of the adaptability that age slowly erodes. The mistake many people make is assuming that lack of immediate feedback means lack of effect. Vascular improvements often register first as ease rather than numbers. Walking feels smoother, hands feel warmer, recovery shortens. These are signs of improved responsiveness, not structural change. Over time, those functional gains often precede measurable shifts, not the other way around. When arterial support is understood this way, expectations settle into something sustainable. There is no reliance on a single fix, and no discouragement when progress feels gradual. Instead, there is recognition that biology responds to environments that make sense. Cocoa flavanols belong in that environment, not as a centerpiece, but as a reinforcing element that helps good signals persist longer. When the internal conditions allow, even small nudges can restore a surprising amount of ease to a system that was never broken, only overwhelmed. What becomes clear over time is that strong circulation late in life is rarely the result of intensity or luck. It comes from repetition, quiet, ordinary behaviors layered day after day until the body adapts. Researchers like Dan Buettner have shown that long-lived populations don't rely on dramatic interventions. They rely on patterns that are easy to repeat and difficult to disrupt. Arteries, like all living tissue, respond to that kind of consistency. Blood vessels are constantly interpreting their environment. When daily life sends signals of movement, stability, and recovery, arteries soften. They relax more easily. They absorb pressure instead of resisting it. When those signals are chaotic, stiffness becomes the default, not as a failure but as a protective response. This explains why so many seniors feel their bodies narrowing over time, even without a clear diagnosis. It's not a sudden breakdown. It's a gradual shift toward resistance. Seen in this context, cocoa flavanols have a clear but modest role. They are not a rescue strategy or a shortcut. They work best as part of a broader pattern that supports endothelial function. On their own, their effect is subtle. Combined with steady movement, balanced nourishment, and restored sleep rhythms, they help reinforce flexibility at the cellular level. Over time, small reinforcements accumulate. Healthier arteries don't announce themselves loudly. They show up as ease. Walks feel less taxing. Energy holds a little longer. Recovery comes faster. These changes may seem minor, but they protect something far more important than numbers on a chart. They protect confidence in the body. In the end, preserving arteries is inseparable from preserving independence. Both are maintained the same way, through small, repeatable habits that gently push biology in the right direction, day after day, until resilience becomes the natural state again.